Welcome to Guerrilla Discipleship. My name's Kevin Baker. I get to be your host, and I'm glad you're with me today. I'm kind of excited about what we're going to be talking about today and over the next few weeks. I've been thinking quite a bit about how did I get here? I don't know if you ever do that or not, but I've just been sort of pondering, how did I get to where I am in my own walk with Christ? What worked well? Who poured into me? What took place? How did it work? That kind of thing. And I've really been fascinated to go back and look a bit at how did God use others in my life? How, basically, the question of how was I discipled? What happened in my life? Because honestly, I wasn't choosing. I didn't choose to be discipled. I didn't even know what discipleship really probably was at the time. This was not something that I was like studying up on. And so I've been thinking, how did that work in my life? Now, again, my circumstances are going to be so unique and different than yours, but there may be some commonalities. And I think it's worth looking. I encourage you to ask that question of yourself. How did you get where you are? What were the influencers? Who influences? Who were the influencers? And how did it happen? How did it start? What was it like? Because there may be some critical pieces that you and I can learn from our own experiences that we can either turn into patterns that we're going to use or that we would want to avoid if they were not helpful in the way that we walk. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm just going to share, how did this work in my life? How was I discipled? What happened? And how did this all process out to get me to the place where I am today? Now, there are many factors and many years I've been really following Jesus. I would say I began to be discipled at around age 20, 21, and I'm now 63. So for over 40 years, I've been in this process of really growing in Christ. It probably began before that, but I was more intentionally engaged in a disciple-making process some 40 years ago, a little over 40 years ago. And so I just want to talk about that, share it, not again as this is the way it has to be done, but as a learning experience for myself and for you as we talk about and think about how could we be disciple makers in the culture that we're living in and with the people that God has invited us to disciple or to engage with. So let me just say this, kind of start where I began. I was chosen. I didn't choose this process. Now, I had been out of church for a while. I was a prodigal. I had grown up in church, and then around age 14, my brother and I successfully rebelled against going to church. We thought it was boring. We didn't want to go, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, we won that battle, and I stopped going. I didn't stop believing. I didn't stop desiring God. Didn't even stop talking to God. But, at 14, my faith was very immature, not even sure that we went to church fairly regularly. I wouldn't say we were every Sunday people, but we were in church fairly regularly, and I was not in any way resistant to church. I think I was just in that angsty period of adolescence where I didn't want to go to church. Church didn't seem to have what I needed or wanted. And my brother probably started the rebellion, and I was right there in it thinking, yeah, this is what cool kids do. So I came back to church because I had gotten engaged. And we needed a church, or we wanted a church to be married in. And so I sort of just happened on this church. It was really all very, from my point of view, very circumstantial. From God's point of view, I think very providential. But so I don't want you to have any idea that I had anything. I went to that church simply to say, would this be a church that my fiance and I could go to in order to get married? That was it. I wasn't looking for anything. But I will say this. The first Sunday that I was there, I sensed God's presence in a way that I had never sensed before. I think it was a combination of the warmth of the people and the reality of, or just the realness of the faith. the church, it was the first time I'd been in church where I just felt like this is real. These people are real. What the preacher is saying is real. He's not pretend. He's not pompous. It just felt like, wow, there's something genuine. And because of that, it felt very powerful to me. I couldn't have explained it. But, and the people were very warm. They were very welcoming. It wasn't just the pastor or the ushers that were kind to me, this young guy and young couple at the time. There were people that as soon as the service was over turned around and introduced themselves and invited us into their homes, invited us into their small groups. And so it was a very warm feeling. We refused that. I had no real interest, although I was impressed by their receptivity to us. But what happened is probably 2 or 3 weeks, it wasn't long that I had been going to the church. Again, very impressed with what God was doing. God was doing something from the moment I walked in to that place. But the pastor came up to me. I didn't know him well. His name was George Anderson. He's been my mentor for 40-some years until he passed away last year. Actually, 2 years ago, I think. But the reality is I didn't know much. I just knew he was the guy in the pulpit. And he came up to me, and this is what he said. He said, hey, I'm thinking of starting a Bible study, I think he called it, for some college guys, and would you be interested? So the initiation of my process was me being invited, not me trying to find something. And I think about that with Jesus, right? Jesus was walking along, and he chose his disciples. In fact, later on he said, I chose you, you didn't choose me. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe some of us, and again, you may be on the listening to this and plugged into Guerrilla Discipleship because you want to know what it's like to be discipled, or maybe you're at that place where you're trying to figure out, how can I be a disciple maker? Either way, there's something powerful about being asked. And instead of thinking that, well, we'll wait until people come up to ask us, or, hey, would you be willing to coach me or disciple me? Probably the norm is that we're going to reach out to them. I have no idea how much prayer he did toward this, or whether he just saw me as that age group and said, well, I've been trying to get these guys together. I really can't answer that. I never did ask him that question. But I felt very personally invited. I felt, I guess, it's nice to be asked, right? And I was, God had already begun to stir things in me just in the couple of weeks I'd been there. And so I was very intrigued by who this guy was, how real he was. He seemed like a very, he was a powerful figure in that moment for me. And so for him to come up and invite me I liked it. And I said, sure, I'd be willing. Now, again, this was not that normal for me. It wasn't that I was going to, I was used to doing these kinds of things, and I had been out of church for a long time. So, but there was something about it. Maybe it was just the movement of the Spirit. Maybe it was the right time in my life that when he asked, I said yes. And so the first sort of principle that I guess I would put down is that probably much of discipleship starts by the disciple maker inviting the one to be discipled. That it's a choosing and an inviting, hopefully led by prayer and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. But it is really, I think, in one sense, it's always God choosing us. He's reaching out to us, and so disciple making and discipleship starts with an invitation. And that might be terrifying to you. Maybe you're like, oh, that's my biggest fear. The second thing that I want to say is he didn't invite me just to spend time with him alone. I don't know what I would have thought of that. What he invited me to was a community of my peers. And so I was invited and then placed in community of my peers. Jesus did the same thing. Again, I'd never thought through this. I didn't see this so clearly, I don't know why. I was just experiencing it. I certainly didn't have enough biblical knowledge in those days to go, oh, he's doing exactly what Jesus did. I just wasn't thinking that way. But his invitation was, would you like to gather with some other folks, other guys? It was not co-ed, it was all guys. Would you like to come? I'm going to spend some time with other guys your age. And so I was immediately placed in community in very much the same way that Jesus placed the disciples immediately in community. Now, why is that critical? Well, I could venture a few things, but Jesus clearly thought community was the best way to do discipleship. He did spend time with people alone, but if you look at the life of Jesus, he gathered people in community, and so there's something about that has to be significant. And we could venture all sorts of things. I think Jesus allowed his disciples to learn from one another, and that was really my experience too. When I first showed up and got into this Bible study, I don't remember that I knew any of the guys in there. So that's what I'm saying. This is kind of an unusual thing for me to go. I didn't go with someone. I just went by myself. But immediately there was an openness. I guess maybe he had just established that culture. Maybe they were used to that. But all I remember was that the community felt very comfortable right at the beginning, and that probably is an important thing. Now, community may be in the eyes of the beholder, right? Maybe I could have come in with a chip on my shoulder, and no matter how warm and lovely the guys would have been, I would have seen them as whatever. I could have made reasons for me not to go back there. But my experience was the guys seemed fairly normal. I remember thinking that. These are relatively normal guys, and they seemed a lot like me. We didn't know each other, but they had very much similarities to me, age-wise. Nobody seemed kind of off the wall from where I was. And so immediately there was a sense of belonging there. That's how I recall it, was that I felt like, well, I belonged here. He, the leader, the pastor, asked me to come. I got a personal invitation. I felt good about that, and then I felt accepted by the guys. In fact, I remember one of the first, it was 1 or 2, 3 weeks into it. One of the guys and I were walking out to our car and together, and cars together, and the guy asked me if I would begin to hold him accountable for a struggle that he had. I remember being shocked at it, like, I barely know you, and you're opening your life up to me in a fairly significant way. But I wasn't put off by it. I was surprised, maybe frightened, almost in the sense of, man, I probably didn't feel like I had my life together, much less trying to help somebody else. But all he was asking was, hey, can I just lean into you with struggles I'm having? And so I said, sure. And I probably wasn't ready to tell him any of the struggles I had. But I remember, that stands out to me. I remember feeling, I don't think I'd ever been in a group like that before. And so it just all stood out to me as, wow, what is this? This is kind of interesting. And yet I think I would say, even though I hadn't been in a group like that, I think I was probably longing for that. I was longing for a sense that where I could be real with people and where others would be real with me. And so it was a very positive experience. I remember, again, just feeling at home there for the most part, right from the beginning. Now, I was in that group for years, and so it's hard for me to distinguish how I felt exactly in the beginning. But I do recall, let me put it this way, I don't recall awkwardness other than the normal awkwardness of not knowing people and meeting them for the first time. It was not uncomfortable. How much the pastor and the leader had done to set that culture, I think he had done a lot in that regard, but I can't tell you how he did that. But I think the sense of openness and realness, I want to just keep saying, there was just a sense in which that these were real guys. This was a real, this guy, even though he was a pastor and he was I didn't know how to relate to him in one sense. He came off as very genuine, authentic, and relatable. That made a big difference to me. So I just want to emphasize those two things as we begin to think about how we might be used of God in the lives of other people to become disciple makers. That those two pieces are critical. A choosing, an invitation, the invitation coming. I would say today, as I know more about it, those invitations should be prayed over. God, who is it that you want me to invite? Or at least sensing the leading of the Spirit as to who might be the right people and the right timing. And then to do discipleship in a sense of community. Let's gather not just one person, but a few people and do this together. It could be family, could be a friend group, but I think there's a sense in which community is important. Jesus sort of certainly modeled that. And in my own experience, that's how my disciple making started. That's how my being discipled started. So I would love to know if that relates to anything that you've experienced as you've been discipled. In fact, I would love to know, do you feel like you have been discipled? So many people in the church today don't feel like they've ever been discipled. They've just been in church. And there's we miss so much by not having that discipleship relationship, that disciple-making relationship, that mentoring and coaching. So I will stop there for today. Those are the first two. Certainly glad to continue to talk about this. I'm excited about this and would love your feedback. Again, kbaker@oakdale.church. If you'd like to email me, you can comment here on the screen. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I'd love to know what your experiences are as well, so that we could sort of compare notes and see if there are trends or things that we have in common that God has used. As always, I so encourage you to become, if you haven't already, become a practitioner as a disciple maker. Let's not just learn what this looks like. Let's not just feed our desire for more information. Let's actually begin to practice it. Take the risk to take a step. And so thanks for being with us. Next week, we'll go through the next couple of things that came out of my experience, and glad to share that with you. Thank you for being a part of Guerrilla Discipleship, and looking forward to seeing you next week.